Please join me in the spirit of prayer. Gracious Lord, may the words of my mouth and meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. As I said at the beginning of the service, it really and truly is so good to be back here in this beautiful sanctuary. It is so good to be up here in this pulpit and to be back with all of you in community this morning. For you see, the scripture today, I believe, is all about community. It's all about being in community with one another, in our families, in our church, and most importantly, with God. That's the point of today's story. We can get distracted by the extravagance of the prodigal son and the prostitutes and the waste of the riches, but that's really not what this is about. It is about the rejoicing that God does every time we come back together in love and community. My sabbatical time away was truly a gift, and I cannot thank you all enough for this amazing opportunity to rest and rejuvenate, to learn and grow, to spend time in silence and retreat, and with my noisy family. Lots and lots of time with my noisy family. I have been blessed to travel these past few months, as you all know, and I can't wait to incorporate the things that I have seen and learned into my ministry in the coming months. I know that this time away will help me to be a better pastor to you all now that I am back. I have 4 sermon series relating to my time away that we will go through in this next year. One on the travels of St. Paul to Turkey and Greece, his time in Ephesus, on the island of Rhodes and Athens. Through the book of Acts and the letter to the Ephesians, we will explore Paul's mission to the Gentiles. Next, we will look at the life of Thomas Murray, the Christian monk who lived at Gethsemane Abbey in Kentucky for much of his life, where I spent a week in silent retreat. I will be preaching about rest, Sabbath, silence, and the importance of making time for God in our busy modern lives. We will look at Father Merton's writings and his life, while deepening our faith lives through that sermon series. The third series will be about church leadership, how to be calm and steady in this time of social change and upheaval. I will preach on the lessons that I learned from the books Uproar and Quietly Courageous, and how Trinity can be a leader in moving the church forward through this uncertain but profoundly hopeful and exciting times. And finally, I will preach a series on care for creation, on the climate crisis. Climate change is a reality that's affecting the entire globe, but it doesn't affect every place the same. Where we were out in the western United States, they're feeling the effects much more than we are here in Ohio. Smoke from wildfires clogged our noses and clouded our view sometimes in Idaho and Montana. We camped in Yellowstone National Park just 1 week after the park finally reopened after a 1,000-year flooding event washed away roads and made the northern third of the park completely inaccessible for years to come. And I know that part of my motivation in taking our kids all the way to Alaska was to have them see these massive glaciers before they're gone. At both the Mendenhall Glacier in Juneau and the East Sawyer Glacier further south, we saw descriptions of where the glaciers used to be, back there, and how far they have retreated. Looking at this was shocking and disturbing. But these are just a few of the things that I'm bringing back to Trinity from these past 4 months. I have many stories, much growth and discernment about my calling, about the calling of our church, about our future, and about the scriptures, and a few insights on community. And this morning's scripture, as I said, is about that community. about the way God rejoices when community, family, loved ones return. The joy at the return of the prodigal son is the joy that God feels when unity and community is restored. That is what this well-known story is all about. As I have been reflecting on community, the importance of unity and coming together, the return of the prodigal son, this joyous homecoming, we are, yes, celebrating the return of a pastor to his community. And we are also commemorating the loss and yet potential return to community that happened in the wake of the September 11th attacks, 21 years ago today. It is important for us to celebrate even when we go through hard times. Today's scripture is all about the joyous reunion when our community is reunited, when we come back to God and to one another. The ledger is wiped clean. The gripes and complaints, the jealousy embodied by the brother who stayed is not important. Today's scripture is all about joy and reunion, community and unity. Today's passage, as Rich said, comes immediately after Jesus tells the parable of the lost coin and the lost sheep. The context of all three parables is a big community gathering where people were griping and complaining. Imagine that. He told these parables to the Pharisees who were attacking him again for his words and actions. If you look back to chapter 14 of the Gospel of Luke right before this, he's healing on the Sabbath one more time. He's breaking the rules to show compassion and love and bring people back into community, and the Pharisees can't stand it. The community leaders were arguing against this healing, against this helping, against building up the community in compassion. And so Jesus gets fed up and begins to teach them in these parables: the lost coin, the lost sheep, the prodigal son. Jesus essentially calls out the Pharisees as sinners for tearing apart the community by refusing kindness and compassion to one suffering on the Sabbath. He accuses them of sinning because they put the law above love. In this context, Jesus tells them parables about unity and love above the law, the highest law from God being love. That's what he's getting at here. And about unity and bringing the community together and rejoicing in that no matter what happened yesterday, the day before, months ago. Now, of course, there are so many ways for us to become lost, to lose our way, to be like the prodigal son. We may find ourselves lost, not just in the literal sense, but in the spiritual sense, moral sense, or in our faith journeys. We may feel lost and feel that God is far away from us. We may read the news and get depressed and stressed and think, no, how can God be in all this? But through it all, God is there. That is also the lesson of this parable. While the son was off doing whatever he was doing, God was there. The father was waiting patiently with arms outstretched, just waiting for him to come back. And he rejoiced when he did. It's a beautiful, beautiful parable. I love this story. This love that God shows to the son who did all these things doesn't follow logic or rules. I also love this parable because the first time, second time, and perhaps 20th time I read it, I was mad. I'm like, wait a minute. He does not deserve all that. Fatted calf, big party, celebration. Look what he did. And that's why Jesus tells this parable, because he knows every single one of us that reads it and hears it will think that. And then he has to flip the script and make us think deeper. Darn it, Jesus. One more time, you can't let us be angry. You have to show us a way for compassion. And that's what I think when I read this scripture. The elder son in the scripture was angry because he was using human understanding of fairness to judge his brother's behavior. Not God's, but human judgment of fairness. But God does not abide by these rules, no matter how many times we try to put God into a neat little box. God's out there. We draw a circle around who is in and out. Jesus is out every single time. God's love does not keep track of the wrongs committed, the disappointments, the foolishness, the reckless decisions we have made. The only thing that matters, according to the story, according to Jesus, is returning home, returning to God, coming back into community, and that's when God throws us a big old party and welcomes us with open arms. This sometimes is hard for us to accept. Like the older brother, we often find ourselves judging ourselves even by the human standards and laws and judgments. So it's hard for us to understand. That's why we come back to this parable over and over again, because we need to keep reading it, keep preaching on it, keep thinking about it, because it challenges our basic assumptions, as Jesus always does. The story of the prodigal son reminds us that we are all worthy, and God is waiting to welcome us back, no matter how long we've been lost or missing, no matter how far we have gone or how lost we feel inside. Today, we pause to recognize the 21st anniversary of the September 11th attacks. And I always feel that it's important to take a moment and honor the fallen, to pause and remember the tragedy of that day when the world did change. And as always, I want to take a moment to honor the first responders who sacrificed so much on that day, the true heroes of 9/11. Of the 2,977 victims killed on that day, 412 were emergency workers in New York City who responded to the World Trade Center attacks. Due to the efforts of those folks, an estimated 87% of the 17,000 people in those towers were rescued that day. Those are the true heroes of 9/11. I have preached on September 11th many times before, but this time I have a new story and a new perspective. On our trip this summer, we spent 2 days in Riverton, Wyoming, the small town in central Wyoming my father-in-law grew up. We stayed with his brother, Sarah's uncle Stephen, and his family for 2 nights. Now, Stephen stayed in Riverton while my father-in-law went to Stanford in California, Idaho, Spokane, Washington, and eventually Memphis. But the younger brother, he stayed put and worked with his father at the family-run newspaper in Riverton for his entire life. They just sold it last year. Now, Stephen also happened to mention that one of his favorite pieces in over 40 years of journalism was a piece he wrote after 9/11. He was even nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for this piece, which he managed to throw in. He didn't win, but he was nominated. This piece was a 17-page special article chronicling the road trip that he took with his then 8-year-old son, Robert, from Riverton to Lower Manhattan, Ground Zero, in September 2001. He left just 10 days after the towers fell and drove across the country. As you may recall, all planes were still grounded at that time. And he interviewed people that he met on the way from Nebraska to Ohio to upstate New York. Stephen felt so far and removed from this moment, being thousands of miles away in Wyoming. He was looking for community, looking for meaning, looking to understand what had happened. He, like all of us, was trying to figure out what was going on in the wake of 9/11. So, unlike most of us, he went on an epic road trip with his 8-year-old and interviewed people that he met along the way. Stephen and his son Robert got to spend nights in empty hotels with pools and water slides to themselves, as most people were not traveling. The trip was full of moments, big and small. Stephen took the trip to make sense of the 9/11 attacks. A massive event with worldwide implications. And yet, through the 17 pages of that article, I read them all, the lessons he learned came down to the smallest and simplest of moments. The importance of community. The importance of family. The importance of being there for his 8-year-old son. As they drove across the country, he did actually manage to make it to Ground Zero on foot. In a 10-day road trip, they spent 2 hours in Lower Manhattan. They had to take multiple taxis. They had to slip through multiple police barricades. They had to pretend that they had business on Wall Street. By the time they got there, hope for survivors was gone. The wreckage of the site was off limits to reporters. He tried to get credentials and was denied. The air was toxic, the smell was horrific, and the wreckage was unlike anything the world had seen before. And Stephen and Robert made it there to see, to bear witness, to try and make sense of it all. And there at Ground Zero was the people who were most affected by 9/11, by the attacks. There was only love and compassion for the victims. There was a response they saw in Lower Manhattan, scrawled on the sidewalks in makeshift memorials that were just being started to be put up. And the people they talked to, they all had a response that reflected the gospel call of love and of healing for the afflicted, of lifting up broken families and wrapping them in God's loving embrace. That's what they found when they went to Ground Zero, just 2 weeks after the attacks. Stephen took his camera out of his pocket and tried to take a few pictures before the cops took it away. Luckily, he did. He got some pictures of the wreckage. He got some pictures of the memorials at Ground Zero. That's what touched me the most. Many of those memorials were for members of the fire and police departments. It was the sacrifice of those first responders, the firefighters, the policemen and women that were the most heartbreaking and profound. Stephen and Robert photographed memorials to the public servants who rushed into the burning buildings while people were rushing out. They went to help selflessly, and as we know, paid the ultimate price. Everyone that Stephen talked to on that epic road trip had something to say about the attacks. There were calls for violence and revenge far and wide, but in New York, they found only calls for unity and community. And what they also found in those 10 days driving across the country was a call to be closer as father and son. They found a way to remember, even in the most difficult times, that wrapping your arms around your 8-year-old and just holding him. I said I was going to cry my first day back. Okay. In the loving embrace of joy might be the most important lesson that we can learn from a global tragedy. Here, in Stephen's words, which are far more eloquent than my own, is the final paragraph from his article. One last look. Before we left the Mount Rushmore premises, Robert had stopped for one last look at the monument, framed by the big granite posts that form the Rushmore entryway. I shot a photograph of him. It's my favorite picture from the trip. It shows my inquiring, good-natured son, his camera swinging from his arm, paused in mid-step, gazing at the huge faces in the rock. Even from the seat, I can see the wonder. And I think that if I'm lucky, through all the years of my life, I'll be able to look at that picture of a little boy in blue and recapture those 9 days of September and revive the sense of sailing along on a gray ocean with my only child. Always 8, always chattering, always questioning. With a big destination ahead of us, I was counting on me to get him there. I was being happy just to be where Dad is. and of my being happy just to be where he is, of having him just an arm's length away. That's how it will be, I hope. A split second from a day, from a trip, from a mad year, from a lifetime. Freeze this instant, like the Titans on a mountain, a monument to what we did, carved forever in the warm stone of memory. His article resonated with me, in particular this summer, as we too were on a road trip with our children, crossing the country, and Felix turned 7 this summer, just a year younger than Robert was on that epic trip. We also took many of the same roads that Stephen and Robert did 21 years ago, driving some 2,500 miles back from Idaho to Canton last month, and thousands more in Idaho, Wyoming, Washington, and Montana. We even got to spend 2 days in the Black Hills of South Dakota on the way home. We took the kids to see Mount Rushmore, just as Stephen and Robert did 21 years ago. We were there at the monument with thousands of other people. It was crowded. Most of them clad in leather jackets and biker insignia. More than I've ever seen. For you see, I booked our stay during the Sturgis motorcycle rally. Quite by accident. Being ignorant of all things biker culture, I had no idea what Sturgis was. So on August 7th through 9th, there we were, with 40,000 of our closest biker friends. Felixans are in love seeing the motorcycles. They couldn't get over it. They'd never seen so many. The motorcycles, the bikers, took over the streets of many of the small towns in the Black Hills, and they were everywhere. And they were so kind and sweet to our kids and family, at the restaurants we went to, at Mount Rushmore, at all the tourist sites. The bikers reminded me that we are all one big community. As different as we may look, dress, and sound, there is no question that we found an unlikely camaraderie with all those leather-clad folks at Mount Rushmore. May we all find ways to come back to God, to come back to that community, to remember that God's embrace, like a father, will be warm, loving, and welcome. Amen.